Good evening. Welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring women-owned businesses from across the country. And now, for your host, Kimberly McLemore.
All right, good evening and welcome to your Resource for Success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses from across the country. I am your host, Kimberly McLemore, and welcome to a special edition of tonight's show. With us, we have Mike Robbins. Mike Robbins is the author of 5 books, including his brand new title, We're All in This Together, Creating a Team Culture of High Performance, Trust, and Belonging, which released April 21st. For the past 20 years, he's been a sought-after speaker and consultant who delivers keynotes and seminars for some of the top organizations in the world. His clients include Google, Wells Fargo, Microsoft, Genentech, eBay, Harvard University, Gap, LinkedIn, the Oakland A's, and many others. He and his work have been featured in the New York Times and the Harvard Business Review, as well as on NPR and ABC News. He's a regular contributor to Forbes, hosts a weekly podcast, and his books have been translated into 15 different languages. So without further ado, please help me welcome to my platform, Mr. Mike Robbins. Hey, Mike, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, Kimberly. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. I'm glad that we are going to try this again. So it's like, All right, let's see if we can get through this interview tonight, right?
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties, but here we are. It's all the way the world works these days, right?
Exactly. So anyway, I thank you for coming on and spending some time with me. So Mike, why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about what you've been up to and tell us a little bit more about who Mike Robbins really is.
Oh, well, like everybody, I've got a windy journey in my life to get to where I am today. I grew up here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I still live. I grew up in Oakland, and I played baseball growing up as a kid, Kimberly. That was my passion. I was pretty good at it. I actually got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees. Didn't end up signing a contract with the Yankees at that time because I got an opportunity to play baseball in college at Stanford, which is about an hour from where I grew up. Went to Stanford, played baseball there. Then I got drafted out of Stanford by the Kansas City Royals, and I did sign a pro contract at that time. And the way that it works in baseball, you get drafted by a major league team, whether it's the Yankees or the Royals or, the Cubs or the Dodgers or any of the teams in the major leagues. You have to go into the minor leagues and work your way up through the system. Unfortunately for me, my third season, still in the minors, I went out to pitch one night. I threw one pitch. I tore ligaments in my elbow, blew my arm out. I was 23 at the time when I got hurt. I had started playing baseball when I was 7. 2 years, 3 surgeries later, I was finally forced to retire from baseball. And, as you can imagine, I was devastated by this, right? I mean, this had been 18 of the first 25 years of my life focused on this one thing. But one of the big realizations that I had when my career ended in baseball, as disappointed as I was and as much as I didn't quite know what the heck I was going to do next, is I realized the only regret that I had from the whole experience wasn't that I hadn't made it, wasn't the times I, blew the game and screwed it all up and all the stuff I got stressed out about when I was playing. The only regret that I had was that I didn't fully appreciate it while it was happening. Mm-hmm. I was too busy trying to make it. Kid raised by a single mom from Oakland, not a lot of money. I was going to hopefully make it to the major leagues and, have some success. But up to that point in my life, even though I was pretty good, I spent most of my time thinking I wasn't good enough and comparing myself to everyone around me, literally like holding my breath, hoping that I didn't mess it up. And when it was all said and done, I thought to myself, oops, I think I missed the point. Mm-hmm. So, it was a pretty painful way to learn a really important lesson at a relatively young age. I didn't know the full significance of the lesson, though, Kimberly. I moved back home. I got a job working in the tech world. It was the late 90s, worked for an internet company. And the things that I had been interested in outside of baseball but related to kind of human beings, I sort of erroneously thought they were sports-related things. But when I got my first job, I realized, they're not sports things. They're human things. I noticed it wasn't always the most talented people were the most successful, and it wasn't always the most successful people that seemed the happiest and the most fulfilled. So I wanted to start to learn myself, like how do I translate talent into success and success into fulfillment? I'd never learned that. All those years of education, I'd never learned that. And then on a group level, I was fascinated by the notion in sports, but I saw this was very much the same in business, that it wasn't so much about the talent of the members of the team, although that was obviously important. It was more, how do the members of the team actually work together? Because I was on a bunch of baseball teams where like we had a ton of talent, but the teams weren't good because there were too many egos, or people didn't like each other, or there was a lot of backstabbing, and just the chemistry of the team was off. And I was like, oh, that's the same in business. We call it culture in business, but it's the same phenomenon. And so after a couple of years of working for a couple of different internet startups in the late 90s during the dot-com boom time, I ended up starting my consulting business 20 years ago, really with some curiosity around these things. Like I wanted to learn more about this, both for myself personally, but I wanted to teach other people, inspire other people, and that's really what my 5 books have been about in different facets of that. My most recent book, We're All in This Together, is really kind of the culmination of 20 years of research and working with lots of great teams and organizations, a lot of the big companies that you mentioned when you introduced me, but also I've worked with a ton of small businesses and small business owners and entrepreneurs over the years. So much of this intangible stuff is both hard to focus on, but super important. We often don't focus on it because we have to focus on the bottom line of, the business or the work or get stuff done. But a lot of that sort of intangible stuff is really what goes into our success or ultimately our failure.
I agree with you 100%, but I want to kind of backtrack on what you were saying earlier, how at 25, you realize something that you didn't appreciate, but to even go back even further, to have the opportunity to be recruited at such a young age, something you have been, wishing and praying and hoping for and really working hard to get there. What was it that made you decide to not move forward? Because I know originally we talked a little bit earlier, we were talking about the fact how, you were being recruited to go to the Yankees, but then you decided, I'm not going that direction. What made you decide that that was much more important not to make that move?
Well, some of it was strategic and some of it was priorities. I mean, the way it works in pro baseball, if you play baseball in the U.S. and there's some other countries as well, when the draft happens, they can draft players out of high school, out of junior college, and out of four-year colleges. You're eligible for the draft if you go to a four-year school after your junior year. And the truth is, you're going to spend a few years in the minor leagues anyway. It's different than other sports like basketball and football and even hockey where you get drafted. And, like in basketball, the first-round draft picks are, they're in the NBA that very next season. It doesn't work that way in baseball. And a school like Stanford has a really good baseball program and had for many years. When I was at Stanford in the mid-90s, they had just won the national championship in 1987, 1988. So not to mention it's one of the best schools in the country. So there was the strategic part of like, if I go to Stanford and play well there, I'll probably get drafted again as a junior out of Stanford, and I can sign at that point, and my baseball career will be, just as far along as it would have been if I'd gone into the minor leagues with, say, the Yankees or whatever team, I had the good fortune of getting drafted by. But then on the priority side, I come from a family, we didn't have a ton of money, but education was super important to my mom. And she raised both me and my older sister with this notion of like, you're going to college, you're getting a degree, that's important. And that part of it was, baseball's risky. Any sport is risky, even if you're good. Like you could get hurt and there's a lot of, variables. So going to college was both a smart thing to do from a baseball standpoint, although a little risky. And I knew I'd walk out of Stanford with a degree, which would benefit me in life if baseball didn't work out. So, thankfully I did get drafted again as a junior and actually got drafted higher than I did out of high school by the Royals than the Yankees. So it worked out for me on that front. And, going to college and playing baseball in college and also everything that I learned in class and outside of class turned out to be invaluable. And ultimately, the relationships that I made when I was in college have continued to be incredibly valuable to me, both personally, but even in my business over the years.
Right. And, like I said, I think that they have that type of insight. And even though I'm sure that you were kept thinking, well, maybe I should have just kept going, none of this would have happened. Yep. But at the end of the day, what we learn is that we're not in control all the time. And
right.
what we believe our desires are to be. And there's always somebody saying, nope, we have more for you. And then having to trust that path and to keep moving, I think was even much more important. And then the thing that really stood out to me when we were talking is how you said that you did not appreciate what you had. How can you explain that even further? That what do you mean you didn't appreciate it? Being so young, I don't think people should believe that you should have all the answers. So to be able to sit back and relive that moment, what else really made you think that you didn't, trust and believe or really appreciate that moment that you had?
Well, it's kind of like, it's sort of a natural phenomenon. I mean, I'll just use an example that most of us can relate to because, have you ever looked back at a photograph of yourself when you were young or younger, maybe younger as an adult or whatever the case may be, and think to yourself, I should have appreciated having that really young body, right? Just as an example.
I do that all the time. No.
Right. But it's very difficult. Yeah. It's very difficult when you're 20 years old to be like, I'm so grateful that I have a 20-year-old body, because you don't have any perspective that, one day you might be 40 or 50 or 60 and you're going to go, oh, this,
Right.
So in some ways, I think the same is true. Like, I was so in it, and this happens for us in our lives, not just in sports, but in business and in things. We're so in it, and there's so much focus often on the challenges or the next step or the next goal, or I'm trying to get there, or I'm competing, and sports is so competitive that I was like holding my breath, hoping that I didn't screw it up, right? Hoping I would get there one day. And I thought to myself, when I get to the major leagues, when I get to pitch at Yankee Stadium or whatever, the pitch in the World Series, or I get that phone call, they say, Mike, we're calling you up to the major leagues, call your family, you're going to, whatever. I figured once I got there, then I would appreciate it. But the way that life works, as we've all learned, most of us the hard way, is it's our job to appreciate things as they're happening. Often we don't stop to really enjoy things or really smell the roses until after the fact. Something bad happens. One of the silver linings when something bad happens is it wakes us up to a lot of the good stuff we weren't paying attention to. Absolutely. Right? Like, I mean, again, hard to appreciate having, healthy ankles until you sprain your ankle. And then you're like, oh, I walk around on my ankles every day and I don't think, thank God my ankles feel good. I thank God I have no pain, and then once you have some pain, you're like, oh, I should have appreciated that a little bit more. And so it's hard to do, but that's been a big practice of mine personally, Kimberly, over the years. And part of what I teach in my work, my very first book is called Focus on the Good Stuff, which is actually a heck of a lot harder than it sounds. People hear that and go, oh, that's Pollyanna, that's just having a positive attitude. And yeah, it is. But you know what? Especially like right now in the middle of a global pandemic, you know how hard it is to focus on the good stuff? Yep. It's like there's not a lot of good stuff that's just flying at us in the news every day.
Right.
So, but at the same time, it doesn't mean there's not a lot of good stuff that's not happening. It's just we have to look for it and find it authentically and be able to call it out and acknowledge it in our own lives, in our relationships with the people around us. Because if you think about leadership, you think about motivating ourselves and others, it requires a certain amount of genuine positivity, not fake, rah-rah, sort of toxic positivity, as we call it, where we're, hey, everything's great, it's awesome, when it's not.
Right.
But a genuine ability to look at the challenging environment or the challenge that we face and be able to find some silver linings and be able to figure out how we're going to navigate through. As you were saying, we never know what life's going to throw us. I mean, none of us a year ago thought this is what life would look like.
That's right.
Right now for us. Here we are.
Yeah. And we were still stuck in that per se, and I guess stuck is not always a good word to use, but at the same token is that we have been made, we had to stop what we're doing. Our lives literally were just like, hey, you're not doing this anymore. You're going to sit down and you're going to have to reevaluate everything around you, whether it was your job, whether it's your personal life. And, and it's funny when you hear these stories about people talking about, oh gosh, I've had to spend more time with my significant other and realize either I like this person or I don't like this person so much anymore, because you've had nothing but more time to do those things to really, truly understand what life is really about. And because we are so busy moving, and we don't take the time to appreciate the little things we have. And even now, I kind of get frustrated when I hear people constantly complaining about, oh, we can't go anywhere, we can't do anything. And I sit back and think, what are you doing? What are you really truly taking this time to do that you weren't able to do a year ago?
Totally.
I always think about with me having to travel, a lot, and think about it's like I've just been dying to have that little bit of downtime. So it's been really great to be able to say, I can focus at being at home and enjoying these moments. And yeah, I would love to see my friends more often. I think we all would. But at the same time, I've been able to reevaluate everything I've been wanting to do, and I'm actually doing that because I have more time to not have to worry about running up and down the street to get to work, or running, or having to rush home and do this or do that, because we're constantly, in that motivational moving of, well, this is what's next. Never really taking the time to, like you said, smell the roses, or just truly appreciate that you even have a job, or you have a business. And so I definitely agree with you 100% on that. And so when you say that, but, like I said, being 25, though, it still takes a somewhat of a special person to really sit back and reevaluate, even if, whether it was a couple years later, that, hey, this is what happened. And not because it's so much your fault. This is, like I said, life gets in the way and things happen, and you do have to know how to move forward, and you have done that. So having that, going through that process, and, you had to move on. So you said, hey, I want to do a business. Obviously, you just didn't jump right into that right away, but talk a little bit about the process of what it took for you to do this, to do your business, and some of the challenges that you came across, trying to, maintain your motivation of wanting to do this, and then also being able to help others as well.
Well, it wasn't easy. I mean, I didn't grow up with any entrepreneurial influence at all in my life. Mm-hmm. My mother was a school teacher, and then ultimately did start her own business later in life, but struggled quite mightily with the business side of it. She liked that she was her own boss. But I never really even thought of my mom as an entrepreneur, and she didn't even think of herself that way or talk that way. My father had been in radio and television, although struggled in his life with bipolar disorder and really had a tough time. So I say that because I had this sense. I would wander into bookstores. This was even when I still was playing baseball, and I would go into like the self-help section of the bookstore because I was interested in reading those kind of books and sort of motivational, inspirational type of things. But I had this weird question in my head that I never would even say out loud, like, how do these people get qualified to do this? Because I think that would be a really cool thing to do. And then my baseball career ends. I move home. I get a job working in the tech world, but I still had it got louder and louder. The voice kept, you're supposed to write, you're supposed to speak, but it was like, you might as well have told me I was supposed to be an astronaut or like, climb Mount Kilimanjaro or something. It was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't, anyway. But then actually the universe intervened. I got laid off in the summer of 2000 when the dot-com bubble burst. And it was scary because I was, living in San Francisco and had rent to pay and the whole, and like I lost my job and didn't know what exactly I was going to do. But I had a mentor of mine say to me, if you could do anything and you didn't have to worry about paying the rent and you weren't worried about your bills, I'm like, what would you do? And I was super clear. I was like, I would start writing and speaking, and I want to help people. I want to share my story. I want to share my experience. I want to keep learning about these things that I'm interested in and I find challenging but fascinating, and I want to teach people. And he was like, oh, well, that seems really clear. You should do that. And I'm like, now? And he said, well, yeah, why not? And I was like, because I'm 26 years old and I don't know anything or anyone, and I have to pay the rent. And my mother will get, she's like, would you go to Stanford for you so you could just be broke? And you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And so, but my wife, my new girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Michelle, and I've been together for over 20 years. She had actually started her own business a few years before I met her. She started a staffing company and was having some success with it, and had gone through some, challenges and growing pains, of course, just getting into it. But she said to me, look, it's not the easiest thing in the world to start your own business, but it's not as hard as you think, and you could totally do it. It's really just a question of, do you have the courage to do it? And that's basically what helped motivate me to start. And it was the beginning of 2001. I made a declaration to myself, Kimberly. I said, I'm starting this business. People said, oh, go back to school, get an advanced degree in psychology or organizational development. And I love learning, but I didn't love school. And I said, if I have to do that, I will. But what I'm going to do for this first year is I'm going to, what I call, design my own curriculum, which meant read books and meet people who were doing this kind of work and see if I could get some mentorship, maybe even get someone who had a small consulting firm or to hire me. But what I wanted to do was learn as much as I could try to get the business off the ground in some way. And at the end of the year, I figured, you know what? I might be broke. I might be in debt. But if I went back to school, I'd be broken in debt anyway.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I won't have at the end of the year is an actual degree, but I'll have a degree from, the School of Life and Real Business. And if I'm stuck at that point, I'm sure I could find a job somewhere, even though the job market was really bad at that time in the Bay Area with the technology, sort of .com world imploding. But, I had worked in sales for a couple of years, and I knew some people, and I figured I'll find something. And that was literally it. My whole business plan was just like, try not to have to go find a real job and see if you can actually do this thing for a living.
Right, for real, right?
it was lean, but I learned a ton. And people said this to me, and I didn't understand it at the time, but I totally understand it now. They said, look, Mike, you're young. You don't have a family. You don't have a mortgage. You don't have these responsibilities that are so take a risk now. Try this thing. If it crashes and burns and you can't do it, you'll be okay. And I didn't know exactly. I mean, I knew what they meant. I wasn't dumb that I didn't understand what they were saying, right. But I didn't fully get it until now. I think of my life at almost 47 years old with a wife who I adore and 2 daughters and a mortgage and life. And it's like, oh yeah, if I were trying to start that business, the business I have now I don't know if I'd be able to do it responsibly because I would, I have mouths to feed and people counting on me. So I was lucky in that sense. I mean, I also was young and naive and inexperienced and made a bunch of stupid mistakes because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So, it's like a lot of things. There's pros and cons. It's like, is it better to have a baby when you're 22 or when you're 42? I don't know. Right. I mean, there are different challenges to either one.
Absolutely.
So that was my experience. And I ran into a lot of challenges early on, but I also found there were a ton of people willing to help. And that's what, I know so much of your work is focused on empowering women, empowering entrepreneurs, empowering people in their businesses. And it's like, and nowadays, there's so much support and resource out there. Not that there wasn't 20 some years ago, but there wasn't as much. And the internet was limited and there was no social media. There weren't podcasts like you and I are talking on right now. So it was harder in some ways. But what really benefited me more than anything, and I know it's weird to say this right now because we can't get together and see people, but was old school networking, just meeting people and connecting with other real humans who were doing the kind of work that I wanted to be doing and asking questions and trying to offer any support that I might be able to offer to them, even though I didn't know what I had to offer. And I found people to be incredibly generous and willing to help. But we have to be willing to ask.
Exactly. Keyword. Absolutely keyword. But, even when you were talking about, when you started at 26 and you're thinking, I want to do this, but how do I do this? But I think the biggest thing too, when we're a little younger, is we don't really think about fear as much as we do when we get a little older and we have those responsibilities of family and kids and mortgages and all that. And so, we're a little bit more willing to dive into some of the things thinking, like you said, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I can still go out and get a job. And even though whether you're 40 or 50 or 60, you can still do these things. It just takes a little bit more time. But I think that the thing that's the beauty about it is, like you said, you learned. And it wasn't about having a degree on paper. It was about the degree of life. And I think a lot of times we're so conformed and structured just to, you go to school, you get an education, you get a job, and versus saying, no, you can go to school, you can still get your education, but why not make it a business, or why not do this, have a different format, versus always feeling like, that fearful thought of, well, if you don't get this education or you don't get this job, you're never going to make it. And we always know that's really not the reality, right? There's millionaires and billionaires who've never seen a college book, have never gone through that process.
It's totally true. Someone said something to me early on that I really appreciated. It was I was reaching out to people. It was a coach who was having some success and had been doing it for a while. In the coaching world, the sort of life and business coaching, in the 90s was just starting to kind of come about. And as I started my business, it wasn't the type of industry that it is now. But this guy said this thing to me, a guy named Steve Strauss, who I met through a friend of a friend, and we got on the phone, and we only had one conversation ever. But he said to me, he said, Mike, look, your job is to just throw pebbles in the pond. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, that means you put yourself out there, you write something, you say something, you talk to someone, you do, you keep throwing pebbles in the pond. You don't know where the ripples of those pebbles are going to go. That's not even your job to figure that out. It's just keep throwing pebbles in the pond. And it's something about him saying that, like I saw the visual in my mind, and it sort of took a little pressure off of me at that moment. And I thought, okay, just show up. It's like my athletic training kicked into. It's like I knew how to show up and train. Like I knew how to show up and do the work. I always liked the game better than practice, don't get me wrong. But it was like, okay, I know how to do that. And if I can figure out how to build some of these skills, both what it took to do the work itself and then even to build the business. And a lot of it was awkward and uncomfortable, and it was like trying to drive a car when I didn't know how to drive a car. And, but the notion of the pebbles in the pond and how this would manifest in the early days of my business, Kimberly, was that I sent a lot of emails. Remember, there's no social media.
That's right.
I wasn't posting things, but I sent a lot of email out, and I would send and it was kind of annoying. If you knew me and were friends with me, you got a lot of email from me. But I would send these emails out, and it would be like I would write a little thing, or I would see something. It was something that inspired me. This was my version of sort of an antiquated social media. I was posting, and I was sharing with people things I thought might be interesting to them, and then sometimes a little more self-promotional. Here's what I'm doing, or here's what I'm trying, or let me know if you know anybody. Trying not to be too annoying and pushy about it. But what would happen is, inevitably, those days when I would want to quit, and they happened a lot, especially in the early days, I would find myself in my bed taking a nap at 3 p.m, which meant I'm scared. I don't have any business going on. What's happening? The phone would ring and wake me up or something, right, in my apartment.
Right.
Or I'd get an email out of the blue, and it would be from a friend or someone and say, hey, or a friend of a friend, hey, my friend forwarded me your email and blah, 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 and I know a guy or someone, this woman who works at the thing, and it would just be the randomest thing that wouldn't make any sense, but somehow it would lead me to being on the telephone with another human talking about what I was doing or an opportunity, or I can't explain it, but I think we all know that experience that I'm talking about. And I say that to everybody listening because it's like if we can figure out, especially in the early days, if we're wanting to create something new, having the courage to throw those pebbles in the pond, it's like that's our job. The universe's job is to figure out what the heck to do with all of that stuff. Right? And I think at some level, there's been too many things that have happened over the course of my life, and just about every human that I've ever talked to, when we really get honest about it, it's like, yeah, that weird serendipitous thing that showed up, and, it's like, how do you meet the person that you end up falling in love with? How do you meet some of your best friends? And usually it's, I don't know, there's something happening out there, and we just have to keep showing up enough in life and be available for those things to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. I think that we put so much pressure on ourselves saying, okay, well, I've thrown that pebble in, so now what am I supposed to do? But I love his theory and understanding of it. You don't have to do anything but keep doing what you're doing, and it all will come to place. And even though some days, you sit back and people don't really appreciate, what I'm doing. They don't really value what I'm trying to say or what I'm trying to share. Right. But the key is having the right people. And, here you definitely have the talent. You obviously have proven that for the last 20 years, and you have the right people who are coming to your aid because they know this is the man I need to talk to. This is the man that's going to help our company get to where it really needs to get, and have the proper high performing people we need to have within our organizations. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. So, here you are, you have worked with some of the most high influential organizations, companies, and businesses that most of us would die. They just get an opportunity to do. So talk about what that means to you, and what is it that you share to them that makes people come to you consistently?
That's a good question. I mean, I think part of it is I'm fortunate that I live in a place where there's a ton of, I live right in Silicon Valley area. So
whatever,
so many. Well, but I mean, and I say that I grew up here, and I mean, look, I feel like a lot of us just living in America in general, it's like we sort of won the geographic lottery in a lot of ways. The opportunities exist.
That's awesome.
But that said, I mean, I think I've always operated from the perspective of respect and appreciation, and also realizing humans are humans. Right. And the other thing is, look, I mean, privilege and opportunity, as I look at my own life and I realize, well, I've been super fortunate along the way, but having people that are willing to advocate for us, You know,
Yes.
a lot of the relationships that I have with some of these big companies, the Googles and Wells Fargos and Microsofts of the world, it really came from personal relationships. Like my relationship, I've had a relationship with Google for over a decade. And do you know how I got connected at Google?
How was that?
My sister went to Burning Man with a guy who worked at Google, and she passed along my book, and then he and I had lunch, and I mean, literally, it was like that. And then he introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone, and like 3 years later, after building a bunch of relationships, an opportunity presented itself during the recession, by the way, and I showed up and was like, oh, I could deliver this program at Google, and it went really well. And then someone was there who advocated, and someone else was there, and like, so I mean, I say all of that because, you know, 5 books in and being on podcasts like yours and doing all the things that I do and the ways that we think about marketing and promoting, I can look at my own business, going back to what I said earlier, so much of it has come through networking and relationship building. And I've been a big believer over the years that if I go into and we go into these organizations as we do and we deliver real value, we don't have to spend a lot of time selling ourselves. The work sells itself, and then word of mouth starts to happen. And then, you know, I've done 150 speaking engagements at Google over the last decade, and I don't say that to brag as much as, and it hasn't been a ton of selling on my part. It's been a lot of showing up and building relationships and getting to know people and staying in touch with people and getting a sense of what's going on and what's needed. And, you know, I never have loved selling. I love building relationships, though. That's one of my favorite things in life. And so, again, I think a lot of us as business owners and people listening, wherever you find yourself in the world of business, it's like finding the things that you love to do and then leveraging those things. And the stuff that you don't love to do, if it's possible to ask some other people to do that, and it can be hard if we don't have a ton of resource,
Right.
but figuring out how to have other people utilize their skills and ability so that you can stay as much in what we call your zone of genius as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like what you said. I mean, it's all about relationships. And I think, you know, the thing that kind of is aggravating today is that because we have so much social media, you'll find people who would just reach out to you, but they know nothing about you. They have no relationship with you. And it's just like, oh, well, I just need you to do this. I think I get, you know, millions of those a day, it seems like. And it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. I don't even know you, but you want me to do this, and this. It really is about building relationships, because that's how you continue to grow. That's how you continue to thrive. And then that word of mouth is probably the most important portion of marketing and getting to know, you know, people, you know, because of what you've done, not because of how much you have sold, you know, or that type of thing. So I definitely agree with you on that when it comes to building your business. And you know, people who are listening and new and trying to figure out what they want to do, you know, a big part of it is understanding what your passion is, but turning that passion into a real business it takes time. And so if you're looking for that to happen overnight, that's not going to happen. You know, it really does take some time to build it. But, you know, we all get that, you know, we live in a world today where it's instant gratification. And, but at the same token, we've all been kind of kicked back a little bit, saying, well, you know what, now you have to really show up, because you don't have the opportunities to just get out and see people and play that game. You really do have to show up now. You really do have to build your business in a different way, even though we have the technology that's there. I think it's great, but at the same token, it can also become a negative if you're not utilizing the tool in the right way.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So, you know, I have a couple more questions before we end this evening. One of the things I always ask, well, I do want to ask one other question besides this before I get to the last one. Is that I want to talk about your podcast. So what is the name of your podcast, and when do you air your podcast?
The podcast is called We're All in This Together. I started it actually back in 2016. I was working on a book at the time called Bring Your Whole Self to Work, and I wanted to interview people, leaders, change makers, interesting people that I knew just for research for the book. And so we started the podcast at that time and was really enjoying it. And then I was finished writing the book, but wasn't finished with the conversation. So we continued it on. And then I started working on this new book, We're All in This Together. And so we just changed the name of the podcast to that, because I was similarly doing some research for it at the time. But, you know, we've done about 230 episodes, and it's basically, it's either some weeks it's just me talking about things going on in the world and how it relates to teamwork and leadership in our lives. Sometimes it's me interviewing different people. I actually had an interview a couple weeks ago on Inauguration Day with a guy named Bo Brabo, who actually worked in both the Obama White House and the George W. Bush White House because I was fascinated to talk to him about some of the divides and divisiveness we see in the country right now, and what he thinks from his perspective, having worked in 2 White Houses under 2 administrations, of what can we do to come together. So the kind of conversations we have on the podcast are a lot about finding common ground and coming together and really building strong teams and strong cultures.
Well, that's interesting. So when are you on weekly? So what time do you come on?
It varies. I'm not quite as disciplined as you are with it, but we try to post it. We try to post it once a week on Wednesdays, but it all depends on kind of my crazy schedule and if I'm inspired and what's happening. So, when we first went into the pandemic, we were posting episodes like 3 times a week because I was saying to the audience too, self-servingly, I'm going stir crazy and freaking out here. I need to be talking to people. So I was like on social media live all the time, and I was on the podcast. I've kind of calmed down from that manic behavior, but that was a little bit of how I was managing some of my anxiety in the early days of COVID.
Yeah. That's one thing. It's great about podcasts. Like you said, you get to talk to somebody different, whether it's weekly, daily, or whatever, and you can utilize the information. It's always great resource, for those to listen in when they're trying to learn something new and just know what's really going on around them. And like you said, with the way things are in the world today, we need as much positivity. We need to hear, more people talk about the reality of things that are going on versus sugarcoating it. But at the same time, giving people that open mindset to think for themselves versus, having to feel like they have to be a part of something in order to be able to move forward in what their dreams and desires are. And so, so we're always thankful to always talk to somebody else who does podcasting. So,
yeah, for sure.
All right. So my other question is that I always ask my guests, if you had somebody today walk up to you and ask you about what do I need to do to start my business, what advice would you give them?
I would say the most important thing, given what you and I are talking about, I think, is a willingness to ask for help. I do think it's important, like you said, knowing what you're really passionate about and what your business is. But ultimately, if you're starting a business and wanting to grow a business, you can't do it alone. And there's so many people that have already walked down the path. So you don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can ask people who've already walked down the path and maybe they're on their way back, because people are also really willing and wanting to help. Most of us love helping as human beings. We just got to find the right people to ask and have the courage. And sometimes they'll say no, and sometimes they'll be annoyed, and sometimes, it's vulnerable to ask for help, but it's super important. The answer is always no if you don't ask, by the way.
Right. That's true. That is true.
Right? And the worst thing they can say is no.
Right.
Right. The worst thing that can happen is you'll be a little embarrassed. There's maybe some judgment. You feel a little rejected. You feel judged. But that almost never happens anyway. And even if it does, guess what? You'll live because that's happened before to you in your life and you lived. You're still here to talk about it.
Exactly. And you're going to hear more no's than you will hear yeses anyway. And, so it just comes with the territory. So.
When I was first starting my business, someone said to me, Mike, you're living your life as though you're trying to survive it. And I said, yes. So he said, you have to remember something really important. I said, what's that? He said, nobody ever has.
Wow.
And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, the mortality rate is holding strong at 100%. Like, you're not getting out of this thing alive, so why are you wasting so much time trying to protect yourself? And to me, that was like really, really important advice, life advice, but business advice. And look, I get scared just like everybody else does. I get, there's things I don't ask for or don't try, and we all do that. But more often than not, what we regret is the stuff we don't try and the things we don't ask for. It's not the things we do and fall flat on our face.
Absolutely. And that's excellent advice. And yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, it's a given. We're all going to be here. We're all going to go. But while you're here, you definitely need to live your life, and not just exist and do the things that you want to do. When, even if it's not about business, I think a lot of times we're, like I said, everybody's so focused on just moving constantly, but not really truly knowing who they are and what they want. And there's definitely been plenty of opportunity these days to do that. And so, that was great advice given to you. And I'm sure that you've held on to that, and you continue to hold on to doing that, utilizing that advice and being able to move forward with your world around you and the business that you're providing and the books that you're writing and all that. So it's always phenomenal to meet another author as well, and doing 5 books. I think that's great because writing is definitely something that, you can expand as part of your brand, but to be able to share that information with others so that they can focus on, how will this awaken me, the things inside of me. So, I definitely always appreciate talking to another author. But what I would definitely like to know is, how can the listeners get a hold of you?
Well, I appreciate you asking. The best way to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. It's just MIKE-ROBBINS.com.
All right. Well, Mike, it has been such a pleasure having to be able to chat with you this evening. And I hope that all the listeners have enjoyed this opportunity, because Mike is a very, very busy man. So thank you again for coming on my show tonight. Do you have any last words for the listeners?
No, just thanks for having me. And, I would just say for all of us, let's just keep having some compassion for ourselves as we continue to navigate through this interesting and challenging time.
All right. All right. Well, again, thank you for coming on the show. For everyone else, I hope that you have enjoyed all of this juicy information that was given out tonight, as well as just, like you said, having some compassion. We have been living in a world of chaos for several years, and I'm hoping that everybody can calm down and, learn to rethink about the things that they see, and, pray that everybody is continuing to move forward and bringing some joy to the world, and get rid of some of this negativity. So the one thing that I've been asking people, or asking my listeners here lately, is, what do you wish existed for you in 2021? If that's something you've been thinking about, you're trying to understand where you want to go, but you not sure what steps to take, why don't we have a chat? So you can reach out to me anytime at Kimberly, WSBILLC@gmail.com. And let's, sit down and schedule 10 minutes with me, and let's, 10, 15 minutes, whatever we need. And let's talk about it so we can get you moving forward. But until then, you all enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you back here next week for another show, 7 p.m. Eastern, right back here on iHeartRadio, or you can listen on the mobile app and download that on Google Play or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until then, enjoy the rest of your evening, and good night.
Good night, everyone. We will be back next Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Follow us on Spreaker, www.spreaker.com/user/WSBI. View our new WSBI website anytime at www.wsbillc.com, and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram.